Cleared for the NFL draft ahead of today's deadline, was a Heisman finalist this past season. Now, our Ryan Wilson projecting him as a top 5 pick. Could he be QB1? A lot of debate about that. Stroud is the second rated quarterback in our draft rankings behind only Bryce Young, and he is 32-0 in college on Saturday. So odds to be the first overall pick. It's interesting because you do have Bryce Young there sitting at -125. Remember, the Bears have the number 1 overall pick now, but a lot of people thinking they're going to trade out of it to a team that does need a quarterback. So Bryce Young sitting at -125, CJ Stroud +200, and then you get defensive guys like Will Anderson Jr. and Jalen Carter. Let's welcome in our draft expert, Ryan Wilson. We are going to get to your latest mock draft here in a second because for the first time, we've got some trades going down. But let's talk about Bryce Young being the favorite there, -125. A lot of people think CJ Stroud has played into being that QB1. What are the chances that we do see Bryce Young as the first name go off the board?
Amanda, I don't know, and this is what makes this so interesting because, right, so if the Texans are there at number 2, maybe Bryce Young is their guy, but as you noted, Chicago has the number 1 overall pick based on how that crazy Week 18 played out the final week of the regular season, and it feels unlikely that Chicago stays put, and if they do, they're not taking a quarterback. So then the question becomes, who's trading up, and then who are they trading up for? I don't know if a team would trade up for Bryce Young, and you and I have talked about this countless times now. The issue with Bryce Young has nothing to do with his playmaking ability, everything to do with his height and his weight. If a team trades up, are they going to go for someone like Will Levis, who is the prototypical NFL quarterback and has drawn comparisons by Will Levis himself to Josh Allen? That certainly gets your attention. NFL teams like Will Levis a lot more than NFL media do, but Bryce Young, it's hard to argue with what he accomplished for Alabama this past season, and he did it, unlike Tua and Mac Jones, without all those first-round wide receivers running routes. He had to drag this offense up and down the field week in and week out, and that's why I'm a huge Bryce Young guy. That's why our guy, Rick Spielman, is a huge Bryce Young guy. But as I say time and time again, NFL teams are concerned about him being possibly 5'10 and about 185. You see CJ Stroud there, +200. You touched on it. NFL teams are having a is he QB1 conversation. They will continue to have that conversation based over the totality of his career, but also primarily over what he did in that semifinal loss to Georgia, where he did just about everything, and that's what gets your attention, and that's why these numbers are so volatile, and it's so hard to predict what's going to happen as we sit here in the middle of January.
All right, so let's look at your latest mock draft. As I mentioned, your first involving trades. You have a trade. You have the Colts trading up to snag that number 1 overall spot, giving Bears the 4th pick overall. Ryan, I'm not going to lie. When I saw this, I pulled it up this morning, and I see Will Levis at the very top. And Chris just had to look at the screen to double check we're both seeing the same thing. So talk to us about how you got the Colts into this position.
Hey, I'm with you guys. Will Levis is my QB3. But here's the thing. Do you know what Jim Irsay is going to do? Because I think that's the question. We have no idea who he's going to fall in love with in the coming weeks and months. You feel like he's going to be out on the free agent quarterbacks after how things have transpired the last 4 or 5 years. So maybe that means no Derek Carr. And in case you're wondering, here's the compensation that came out with. Indy gets the 1st overall pick. Chicago gets pick 4, where they still get Jalen Carter. Great news there. Then they get pick 36, pick 80, and then a 2nd-round pick in 2024, just for completeness there. But I think the takeaway for me is I don't know what Jim Irsay is going to be up to. We don't know who the coach is going to be, who the offensive coordinator is going to be. And if you're just looking at guys without having any idea whether they can play or not, Will Levis is at the top of that list. He passes the eye test, as we say. Then you have to go back to 2021 tape and talk yourself into whether he is a top 5 quarterback. But I'll say what I've been saying for months now. NFL teams like Will Levis a lot more than NFL media folk do, and that's how this is going to play out down the stretch. It feels a lot like what we had with the Daniel Jones conversation and also with the Mac Jones conversation. The only difference here is that Will Levis's last name apparently isn't Jones.
So Will Levis +800, 5th favorite right now. As I mentioned, we're going to get into this time of the year. You also have a podcast. You're going to be putting together these mock drafts all the time. So let's talk about the Bears. At 4, you have them selecting Jalen Carter. If things played out with the Colts there at 1, Bryce Young, Will Anderson. I mean, do you think the Bears would definitely have Will Anderson or Jalen Carter there as a choice? And I'm curious, how far down do you think they're willing to trade if they want to get one of those guys?
I think Will Anderson, Jalen Carter will be there 4. We see the Cardinals take Will Anderson at 3. And I only say that because I think there's going to be a run on quarterbacks, unlike last year where we saw the situation where only Kenny Pickett went in round 1, and that was at pick 20. This is much different. They have teams like the Raiders, the Panthers, the Jets, maybe the Commanders, even though they say they're on Sam Howell now. We'll see how that plays out. So all those teams could be in the business of moving up and push down playmakers like a Jalen Carter, which would allow the Bears to trade down to possibly even 7. Maybe 9 if you're pushing it. I don't know if Jalen Carter and or Will Anderson go that far down the board, but I feel like it's 7's a sweet spot. And the good news is in this situation here, the scenario that I laid out, the Bears get pick 36, which is sort of makes up for the 32nd pick that they gave up for Chase Claypool that hasn't quite worked out yet. And perhaps they can bolster the offensive line or get more playmakers for Justin Fields. So there are options here for Chicago when you look at it as having the first overall pick and no real need at quarterback.
Ryan, do we have merch for your podcast yet? Because I would like some now. No?
You're going to be first on the list, even though I heard you say off air that the Wilson Times cost $99. I heard that, Amanda.
Yes, that's true. Hey, a lot of your predictions did come true, though, with the Wilson Times. Ryan sometimes gives Monday morning headlines. They make fun of me. Chris makes fun of me for loving all the podcasts here. And I
don't make fun of you for loving the podcast.
So much fun.
I made fun of you when you forgot the name of the NFL
podcast with the first pick, Ryan Wilson. So this is interesting. So I'll promo it. Rick Spielman talks about if he's the Bears, when they start looking for trade options, like do you start now? Do you start putting up smoke screens? And he says probably the 2 most important picks besides in the top, first pick in the second round, first pick in the fourth round. Well, but you have to listen to know, which you haven't done yet.
Unfortunately, the Bears gave up one of their second round picks to get a receiver that didn't do anything in Claypool.
We have one more question with Ryan.
Yeah, what is it?
What is it? Oh, it's Stroud. Sorry, we put that in today. CJ Stroud, Ryan Wilson declaring for the draft today.
This is why I make fun of you.
This is why.
I don't make fun of you for liking podcasts.
You deserve to make fun of me. Ryan, what are we doing with CJ Stroud now?
Yeah, so, there was some conversation over the weekend that he may decide to come back. That seems sort of silly. So CJ Stroud, I have him going 5th to the Raiders. So the Raiders trade up as well from 7 to 5 to get their guy. Derek Carr is obviously on the way out. This is an opportunity for Josh McDaniels to build a team in his image, quote unquote, and that means getting his quarterback in CJ Stroud. And as I've been saying for a couple weeks now, CJ Stroud, NFL teams are going to consider him in the QB1 conversation. So he could be a guy that goes above Levis, goes above Bryce Young, if that's how it falls out. So don't be surprised if a team trades all the way up to number 1 to get CJ Stroud, even though we haven't heard a lot about it. Shout out to him for that final game against Georgia, where he proved that he could also run, which was for some reason a question. He's incredibly athletic, but he's already a better passer than Justin Fields was coming out of Ohio State, just not nearly the athlete in open space, although we saw he has that potential based on what he did in that Georgia game. So there you have it. What do we have? 3 quarterbacks in the top 5, and then we'll see where Anthony Richardson ends up. If he sneaks into the top 10, the other quarterback will be in this first round conversation.
3 quarterbacks, top 5, and right now all of them could potentially be the number 1 overall pick, depending on who falls in love with them and who wants to move up. Ryan Wilson, we appreciate it. Now we will talk about your podcast because we've talked about it for a good chunk of the time. Thanks to myself not paying attention. With the first pick, Ryan Wilson, you can watch it. If you scan the little QR code, you can also listen. Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.